Back in July of 2019, I wrote a doc detailing what I perceived to be the eras of level design in the Kingdom Hearts series. Whether this was something I just spontaneously thought of doing, was spurred by discussion with friends, or a reaction of Twitter discourse, I honestly don't remember because this was the before times and I've aged 10 years since then. As a professional game developer who got into this industry due to Kingdom Hearts, I'm constantly looking at the different aspects of KH's design, and I fixated on its level design and these eras for a couple of years. So much so that when it came to sit down and try to figure out what aspect of the design field of game development I liked, my first thought was level design due to how fascinated I was with how KH handled its levels. This doc I wrote, which is linked in the description, has been extremely useful for me to refer back to when I get an idea about KH's level design, especially when I get mad about something, such as Agrabah's lack of variety in all its appearances, which I did when Dark Road first came out and wrote another doc about. Which, while that doesn't reference my eras doc, it was definitely something I was thinking about when writing it. I'm not liking that one, it's not a great doc. In 2020, I made a goal to learn Unreal 4's Blueprint visual scripting language, so I could quickly prototype projects instead of creating design docs to languish in Google Drive hell for eternity. I also wanted to improve my level design skills, so I referred back to my eras doc to see what I liked and what I could imitate for learning purposes. And while I don't remember exactly how I came to this, I do remember getting upset yet again about Chain of Memories. Chain of Memories could have had the most interesting level design in the whole series, but due to the limitations of the hardware and level design not being the point of COM, players are instead given square rooms to fill out based on a room card. While the system itself is neat for player choice, I got so frustrated with the potential COM has that I decided that I was going to make a fan game about my least favorite entry in the series. Not only to learn Unreal and level design, but to hopefully get Chain of Memories out of my head. But before I started on the project itself, which the progress on that project is on my channel and also linked in the description, I decided to replay the series in chronological order, despite my eras only really making sense in release order. I also wanted to see how different the game felt, and chronologically, sue me, it was the first year of COVID. Keeping notes from that playthrough, eventually consolidating them into its own document, also linked in the description, I noticed I started to pay more attention to the gameplay systems design than the level design. It was then I realized that I was more fascinated with how the gameplay systems influenced the level design rather than the levels themselves. Since then, I've tried to get more involved with gameplay discussions regarding the KH series, which is unfortunate for me since a lot of the popular discussions and takes I've seen involve comparing KH2 and 3 and bashing one for not doing something the other does or does not. That's what you get for engaging with Twitter discourse. That being said, I did make a video talking about why I hate COM, and that sounds off the cuff despite being scripted, and I should probably remake that. But recently, and due in major part to the people I've met through March Caprice, I've been extremely fortunate to be able to have meaningful discussions about KH's gameplay systems. So what better way to celebrate March Caprice's 3rd year than by sharing these ideas with all of you? Without further ado, let's discuss the evolutions of KH's gameplay systems. For anyone who watched me talk about my chronological playthrough experience back when I streamed it in 2020, or have watched the archive stream since then, there will be some overlapping subject matter here. While my original goal was to stream me talking about it so I wouldn't have to make an edited video, I feel this subject definitely deserves its own video. Since then, I've done extensive research into nearly every interview about every KH game over the last 20 years in order to properly chronicle this evolution, and even confirm some of my own suspicions about some systems design that I had noticed while playing. What I originally thought was a relatively straightforward path of separate design philosophies that eventually converged into KH3's gameplay design turned out to be a series of intricately connected design philosophies focused on experimentation and player choice. The non-numbered titles especially focus on this, introducing and iterating on systems such as the command menu, triforms, and flow motion, whose best qualities were improved upon and eventually implemented into Kingdom Hearts 3. It was truly fascinating to discover just how much KH3 in particular incorporated from other games, and how the developers combined all this into a gameplay system that is flashy, fun, and chock full of player choice. Let's walk through all this to see how eventually we get to Kingdom Hearts 3. Compared to the series moving forward, KH1 has the simplest gameplay, a base combo that is spiced up through abilities and magic. Minimal options are available to tailor the combat to the player's specific preferences, and unlike its successors, there's less flash to the moves that are available. In a KH Ultimania review from 2002, VFX director Shuichi Sato states that the emphasis on clear movement over flashy effects was intentional. In the same interview, battle planning director Yuichi Kanamori mentions that some of KH1's abilities were intentionally introduced later through the game in order to make KH1's combat easier to pick up and play without reading any game manuals. Despite this intentional simplicity, the depth to KH1's gameplay systems manifests in two forms: environmental puzzles and tech points. Tech points reward the player with extra XP for approaching combat with more thought and reserve. Time your attack to cancel an enemy's attack, hit an enemy with a opposing element, etc. This motivates the player to approach battles more carefully and grants them a deeper understanding of the combat. Environmental puzzles such as casting magic on certain items in the world also give the player a deeper understanding of the combat and the game world. While I love how intricately tied KH1's combat and level design are, we can see other aspects of KH1, such as its camera and more intricately designed levels, get in the way of realizing the combat's full potential. Realizing the limitations of such designs and even its original engine, KH2 was created with a new engine, emphasis on expanding the combat foundation laid out in KH1, and giving more options to the player. Instead of adding a bunch of new mechanics, throwing things at the wall and see what sticks, KH2 only adds 3 major new mechanics, and iterates on the magic system. The square button branch of combat, the magic recharge, reaction commands, and drive forms provide the depth to combat left behind by KH1's tech points' environmental interactions. It gives the player more freedom to experiment with what combat style they prefer to use, and the recharge system on magic and drives means players aren't punished for using either system. Not to say there aren't punishments in this game, but even anti-form can be useful in less dire combat situations. It's a gameplay system that is a great example of easy to use, difficult to master. Players can get by just by pressing X and triangle, but are encouraged by the recharge system and level design that they can further experiment. Speaking of the level design, KH2's major emphasis on flashy combat influences both the level design and how cinematic the game is. Almost all levels are wide rooms that grant the player enough space to explore all combat options, unlike KH1, which were smaller, compact levels with environmental interactions. Some levels, like the Cavern of Remembrance and Halloween Town, do have environmental interactions that are more tailored for navigation, but there are a few and far between. Most interactions are in bosses and tied to the combat through reaction commands, which are powerful and cinematic moves. This emphasis makes the levels feel more like set pieces, but not annoying or tedious to navigate, in KH2 specifically. KH2's levels, I think, are inoffensive. A bit boring, but purposely designed to give players room to explore the combat system. This, however, kicks off what I call the KH2 era of the series' level design, in which every game up to Dream Drop Distance follows with barely any variety. This gets old by the time we get to the third storyline of Birth by Sleep, but the goal of these games in this era is not to iterate on the level design, it was to iterate on the combat and expand the story. Before we move on to the games in this era, we need to backtrack to cover a game I admit I was not expecting to have as much influence on the series moving forward. As I worked my way through the command deck games, I started to get the feeling that there was something familiar about the strategy I was using. I would stack my deck with commands that allowed me to gather as many enemies in an area as possible, and take them out with powerful commands without having to engage with them in basic combat strikes. This was a strategy I also used with Chain of Memories' card deck and sleight system, and that's when I realized that the command deck had to have been influenced by Com's card deck. While I couldn't find a whole lot during the interviews for Com that weren't just Nomura wanted to create a card game and that they made it work by trying to introduce it into a real-time battle system for the Game Boy, I did find numerous interviews that confirmed that the basis for Birth by Sleep's command deck was indeed Chain of Memories' card deck system. Taking into account that the command deck games that followed BBS, Recom, and how their experience on Com influenced how they approached Days' combat design, this means that Com had the farthest reaching influence in the series' combat design, which is fascinating considering how highly regarded KH2's combat is even to this day. Com had one of the most intricate combat systems in the series. The card points, the sleights, the damage done every particular combo, and the magic weaknesses all add to the depth to the system. There are many deck combos to suit any style of play, much more so than numbered titles at the time, and, in my opinion, the deck command system that followed it. It's an interesting example of a smaller, more in-depth resource-based combat system, but, and this is just in my opinion, it's almost too intricate. In order to create an effective deck, players have to keep in mind the cost of each card, where to place them in order to create sleights, or do the most damage within a base combo. The system can be a bit obtuse upon the first and even subsequent playthroughs, especially if one is used to the faster paced combat of KH1. Additionally, the card deck turns the base combat itself into a resource system. Every attack, even ones that miss, use a card, which depletes your resource. This harshly forces the player to approach battle in a more strategic way, making it feel less like a fast-paced RPG and more like a sluggish strategy RPG that doesn't know it's an action RPG. Even Riku's story feels this way despite having less to keep track of. The issues I have with this system are further exacerbated when it made the jump to 3D in Recom, and despite their attempts to add faster paced elements such as reaction commands to slights, we see from interviews about Days that the developers felt that fans wanted a more straightforward gameplay system. Even then, we still see this system of creating a loadout of sorts before entering combat with Days' panel system, and later with the command deck. Diving deeper into Days for a moment, we see the return of the numbered titles command menu in addition to a new panel, backpack, and mission system. Despite the intricacies of the panel system, with its Tetris-like design that opens up more spots as the game progresses, and ability modifiers, Days shows some of the weakest affordances of player choice. Due to the mission nature of gameplay, the player has to tailor the gameplay to the needs of the mission, taking a certain type of magic or using an air combat keyblade, etc. The variety of the missions keeps things interesting, but unless you're playing multiplayer, there isn't a whole lot of room for player expression, unlike COM or KH2. As a result, Days feels the most like KH1 in terms of its combat, which makes sense given the emphasis on more straightforward combat design in both games. It's not to say that Days' system is bad. In fact, I think it was intentional for Roxas to control similar to KH1 Sora, despite me not finding any evidence to support this. That being said, I personally felt the game's emphasis wasn't so much on gameplay as it was story. But even then, we see some interesting dynamics appear from this emphasis through the mission system, with missions getting appropriately monotonous towards the end of the game. Players even begin to fatigue the same time as Roxas does, which is further compounded through the stronger Heartless, less Days at the Clock Tower, and more Heartless missions. It's something I've always appreciated about Days. While we wouldn't see the return of the mission system until Unchained Key, we do see influences of the panel system and modifying Keyblades earlier in Recoded Stat Matrix. But before we get to Coded, we need to cover the second branch stemming from Chain of Memories. As mentioned, BBS's command system is an evolution of COM's card deck system, but it also fuses that system with KH2's drive forms and reaction commands. In multiple interviews, emphasis is placed on the flashy, fast-paced movement that is easy to pick up and encourages players to experiment with their playstyle. We can really see the bones of both COM and KH2 in this game. The command deck system allows players to load a deck with magic, items, or attack-based abilities to augment their base combo or movement abilities. These commands will load over time and reload upon use, which immediately makes it a more forgiving system than Days or COM in the event of missed attacks. Commands can be found or created over the course of the game, and given the sheer number of them, players can load their deck with a variety of powerful moves. Players also have drive-like form changes, which are influenced by commands used in a certain amount of time, shot locks that augment the player's luck on abilities, D-links, special command decks based off of different characters a la summons, and finish commands. Unlike the KH2 approach of iterating on a few systems and adding depth to pre-existing ones, BBS follows the COM route in giving players a nearly entirely new set of combat systems to learn. BBS's system is not as intricate as COM's, but it is easier to pick up and loaded with powerful moves much in the same way of KH2's drives and reaction commands. All that being said, perhaps due to this being the first iteration of the command deck system, I feel like despite all that's added to BBS, it doesn't feel like there are a whole lot of options. The standard combo is only spiced up by doing a command, and then waiting for the next one with a normal attack or shot lock. Form changes help as they add an elemental component or change up the base combo, but then it becomes the same issue when you get the two-stage form changes. D-links are only useful for the first few worlds, then become ineffective once you've melded commands, and shot locks don't slow down time, so it's very risky to use. Not to mention, BBS technically has a balancing issue, the command melding system. Players can meld really powerful abilities pretty early in the game, but doing so without paying attention to the abilities, they can result in rinsing through normal enemies while giving the player a false sense of power. Even though most bosses can be beaten without Once More, Second Chance, or Leaf Bracer, late game bosses are significantly harder to beat without them. I don't know about the rest of you, but I personally have an issue with important abilities being tied to the percentage chance of melding. The risk and rewards of these systems eventually balance out to a combat system that boils down to use a command, wait for a command. Now that's definitely disingenuous to a system that I feel does a lot, but I can't help but feeling the same way I do in COM, where I try to load my deck with as many powerful moves as possible so I can decimate enemies and move on. Battles feel more like a chore than a chance to grow knowledge of the combat system. It's a complaint I have of all the command deck games, not just BBS. It's a system that, on paper, has depth to it, but lacks it in practical uses. We do see Recoded and Dream Drop Distance's attempts to mitigate these balance issues, and further expand upon the idea of player freedom with their iterations, however. Recoded's base gameplay is a streamlined version of BBS's, a command menu with reloadable commands, base combos, and finish commands. No shot locks, dealings, or form changes. The command melding is also streamlined, taking out most of the original system's chances and unknown outcomes through color coordination, and allowing players to try out the commands before committing to a meld. Recoded addresses the melding system's balance problem by locking certain commands behind story updates and system sectors. Players can meld powerful commands for that segment of the game, but cannot meld top-tier commands like in BBS, as the commands required for those simply cannot be obtained until certain parts of the story. This restriction forces players to make do with what's available, a la DayZ's panel system, but the freedom to meld all the commands within that section of that story means that players are not without choice. Speaking of DayZ, we see its panel system influence the game's stat matrix and Keyblade leveling trees. Looking at the Keyblades in particular, like in DayZ, the Keyblades in Recoded change the moves in Sora's base combo. They feature their own skill trees that players can pick between that work well in conjunction with Command Deck base combo. Much in the same way KH2 iterated on KH1 systems as opposed to adding more mechanics, Recoded does this with BBS's systems. This deeper, streamlined version does more for allowing players different options than COM, BBS, or DayZ does, in my opinion at least. The system also serves as a contrast to the myriad of level design modifiers that the game introduces in each world to reflect how the bugs have taken over Jiminy's journal that I would be remiss not to mention. The main structure of a world visit goes as follows. Gameplay and level design sections are affected by glitches in system sectors and keyholes. Glitches resulted in minor, temporary changes in the level, such as the speed of card soldiers or the lack of a door. Keyholes change the level and gameplay completely to a specific gameplay style, with some outlier worlds where the entire level is modified by something different than a glitch or a keyhole, such as Hollow Bastion or Agrabah. Despite some major issues with some sections and the platforming, all these level modifiers keep the gameplay fresh. At this point, we notice a pattern of introduction and iteration. The series will put out 2 games that introduce new systems, such as KH1 and KHOM, and 1 game that iterates, like KH2. Post-KH2, we get the introductions of new systems in DayZ and BBS that Coded iterates on. This is a simplification, but I make it to point out that the iteration games tend to add more depth to its system, making for a richer gameplay experience. Coded is not a perfect game by any means, but I can't help but appreciate how well I feel it iterated on BBS's Command Deck, and the series' growing philosophy of player choice. And the pattern continues, with Dream Drop Distance introducing new mechanics such as flow motion, reality shifts, dream meters, dives, and the drop gauge. For returning systems, we have the Command Deck, and the rest are new iterations of returning systems, such as finish commands, drive forms, and even handling multiple storylines. 3D features the simplest version of the Command Deck system out so far. No finish commands resulting from combos, and no command melding. Instead, we get this functionality within the dream meters. Animal companions, who are also the transformed Chirithy-consumed hearts of sleeping child soldiers that accompany Sora and Riku through the sleeping worlds. Players can create dream meters by combining dream pieces and various items through pre-made recipes similar to various synthesis and command melding systems of previous titles. Dream meters can be added to Sora and Riku's party, and their individual and combined moves adding to another page of swords to the command menu. These abilities can be formed once available like normal commands and function similarly to finish commands for Sora and form changes for Riku. Each dream meter also has their own spirit board that allows the player to unlock more commands through points gained in battle, petting, feeding, or playing with their companions. Unsurprisingly, this is an iteration of the panel system and stat matrix from DayZ and Recoded respectively, so we can see a lot of these iterated systems being funneled into the Dream Meter system. I believe the reason why we see these systems streamlined in the Dream Meters was to iterate on the series' movement capabilities. We see movement-specific combat commands from BBS make a return with reprisal extensions, reality shifts, which in the 3DS version specifically physically move Sora and Riku and the controls to the lower screen, and flow motion. Flow motion is core to the iteration of the series' relationship between movement and combat, and the series' philosophy of player choice. Flow motion allows players to parkour their way around levels at high speeds, unrestricted from the previous game's ability-based traversal systems. Unsurprisingly, this had major influences on the level design, with varied settings, wide open areas, constricting corridors, and verticality galore. This is where the 3D era of the series' level design truly begins, where levels have the room to explore combat options like in KH2, but still have variety and detail in each level like in KH1. Flow motion also has combat functionality, with each move having an attack available if the player should choose to do so. Now, instead of gameplay being a back and forth between using a command or a standard combo strike, players can use flow motion to dash around the battle space to get a better vantage point, do some damage, or make a quick escape. This can make combat unruly at times, and can be overpowered despite the intended design to have players prioritize commands over flow motion in later parts of the game. The first iteration of a system is always a bit funky, as we saw in common BBS. Add in reality shifts, dream meter links, and movement commands, and what you get is a system that almost seamlessly combines combat and movement, making for some fun and flashy gameplay with a variety of options players can tinker with. It's not perfect, and like other systems throughout the series, it's had its fair share of optimal choices and tedious sections. But it was clear from its inception that this freedom of movement was going to play a major part in the games to come. KH3 has the daunting task of looking at the entire series' history of gameplay design and deciding what it's going to iterate on. Early interviews made it clear that the original combat menu is considered core KH gameplay, and that KH3 would evolve that system by incorporating systems from other titles like BBS and Dreamed Up Distance. And while KH3 does have a lot of mechanics, we can see it only really introduces 3 new systems, with everything else being an iteration that takes the 3D route of being funneled together into a few systems, instead of being entirely their own. The depth and complexity these systems have feed into the player choice philosophy built up throughout the series. Let's look at how KH3 handles its Keyblades as an example. Keyblades grant the player different stat boosts plus some additional abilities when equipped. That hasn't changed. But KH3 incorporates the leveling system first seen in Days, but specifically it takes the Key Saga's item-based leveling system. Players can now equip 3 Keyblades, can swap between them mid-battle, and each have their own, mostly unique shot lock, which includes some quality of life changes from BBS, such as slowing down time when triggering. In combat, the game tracks attacks that hit, filling up a bar that eventually triggers a situation command, an evolution of KH2's reaction commands. Prioritizing Keyblade strikes will trigger a Keyblade transformation situation command. While the transformation itself is a new player-available gameplay mechanic, we see its uses in KH2 FM's Lingering Will and BBS. The transformations change Sora's base combo like in Days and Coded's Keyblades. And finally, tied to each Keyblade transformation is a drive form that further boosts a particular stat, such as speed or magic. KH3 takes all these disparate systems from multiple games and ties them into a singular Keyblade system, and lets the player run wild with it. Each Keyblade having multiple attributes, stat boosts, abilities, shot locks, drives, forms, and transformations, in addition to upgradability, means that now every Keyblade is viable in combat. No more tossing out your current Keyblade because the game just gave you a more powerful one. And with 3 Keyblades available at a time, not unsimilar to creating a loadout a la Days or making a deck in Com or Coded, players have multiple options to go into battle with. You can blast Xehanort in the face with a fully upgraded Honey Spout, decimate his HP with the Ultima weapon, or use good old Ragnarok from the Kingdom Key Shotlock all in one battle, and all are viable options. This one system alone provides so much to the player. There's maturity to the design here by adding all these depths to the Keyblade system. We see this maturity of design all throughout KH3's gameplay systems, such as the previously mentioned situation command system. This system still provides flashy, fast-paced moves from KH2's reaction commands and limits, but takes out the quick time event design of it by giving players time to use it before it vanishes, and allowing them to stack to be used in any order a la the command deck, which again affords players more combat options than ever before. Finally, we see this maturity in KH3's movement system with flow motion and air step. While flow motion is toned down for this game, players still have the option by dashing to walls, poles, or even riding the air kicked up by an arrow spell, and can chain it with base combat more seamlessly than in 3D. Air step, a new gameplay system, can be triggered while in a shot lock, and allows players to zoom across an area by bouncing off objects or enemies, or even making a beeline for a boss in a pinch. Like with flow motion, air step can be used seamlessly within normal combat, allowing instant chains involving a Keyblade transformation, magic, which can now be used while moving, or other combat options such as attraction flow or links. Where KH2's quality of life improvements on the magic and the inclusion of the square button and drive forms were its highlights for customization of combat, the quality of life improvements on Keyblades, flow motion, and reaction commands are KH3's. With these 3 systems, KH3 seems to fully realize the bold action and player choice philosophies built up over the course of the series. Not every game is perfect, as we've discussed throughout this video, and KH3 is no exception. Every game I find summons to be less and less useful. KH3 was no different. It's a system that's barely evolved. It's useful, but hardly anything new. And Attraction Flow, KH3's 3rd new feature, is definitely the weakest of the bunch. The concept was cool, summoning dizzy rides, but in practice this ends up being less useful and often annoying if you accidentally trigger it. And the team seemed to notice, as there is an ability in critical mode that converts any attraction flow command to a form change. Can't win them all. KH3 also has multiple playable characters. Not new for the series, but new to have this many in a single player campaign. While this is a system I will always support, I feel it's a little bit hollow due to how little these characters are used and how they take advantage of all the gameplay systems. Riku has no form changes, Roxas doesn't have shot locks, Aqua has limited magic capabilities, none of them have air step or flow motion capabilities, and all of them have horrible shortcuts. And by some miracle, or perhaps an indication of something more in store for her later in the series, Kairi does not have this problem. She has access to most of KH3's gameplay systems, and is the best character to control other than Sora, in my opinion. You'll love to see it. KH3 does so much well with its gameplay designs. It's amazing to track all these systems that it incorporates and look at how well they all work together. Maturity in designs such as this takes multiple iterations, feedback, and testing. And those following the series at any point before KH3's release got to see this gameplay system develop in real time. We got to be a part of this testing process, with the development team playing each new iteration, voicing feedback, contributing to what eventually would become KH3 was an amazing experience, as is playing the finished product. It's a joy to look back at it all, but also try to see what lies ahead. Since KH3, we've had 2 games release, Melody of Memory and Dark Road. Both introduce systems as opposed to iterate. Melody of Memory is a rhythm game that keeps basic KH movement while placing characters on rails, attacking Heartless to the beats of songs from the series. Dark Road is a mobile game taking from Union Cross's swipe-based combat, combined with the original Keys card deck. Melody of Memory is the more novel of the two, and one of KH's more interesting games combat-wise. Whether future games take anything from these two remains to be seen, but we can already see in-progress gameplay from 2 more games in development. Missing Link, another mobile game, uses collectible figures in combat that unleash powerful moves in addition to base combat, similar to Union Cross's medals. Based on impressions and official releases from the prototype test earlier this year, we've learned that these statues have a rarity system and can be gained through gacha, also like in Union Cross. We can also speculate based off of this screenshot that statues can be obtained through treasure spots on the area map, encouraging players to travel to real-life areas like in Pokemon Go. Currently, there's no official news on how these statues will be equipped or used in combat, but if it's anything like previous mobile games, there will most likely be a deck system. The prototype also included 2 Keyblades that, like in Days, Coded, and KH3's form changes the player's base combat, and can be upgraded through materials collected through gameplay, like in Key and KH3. Whether these upgrades will change the Keyblade's appearance is currently unknown. Finally, avatar customization from Key in 0.2 is back, with impressions being fairly positive due to how detailed the options are. That's about all we know from Missing Link until the larger beta comes, but already we can see the bones of the player choice philosophy. How this grows into the final product, and whether it'll influence future titles, will be interesting to watch. KH4 appears to have a command menu, as Nomura considered it core to numbered titles' gameplay systems. We see free running return, a potential iteration of air step through this keychain extension, and iterations of reaction commands and keyblade transformations. And while we know little about this build mechanic as of writing this video, based on the panels, cards, and commands, we may be building gameplay loadouts to take into battle. This is currently all speculation from early footage, but because the series has iterated on so many of these systems now iconic to KH, we can easily identify them. However these systems are involved into their finished projects will be interesting to see, and how they'll further expand on the player's expression and free movement. Whatever they come up with, I'm looking forward to having fun with it. Just like with my 3D encoded videos, I hope this one provides you all with knowledge and grows an appreciation for the development process of these gameplay systems. I had a lot of fun with this, and I hope you did too. If you're interested in more videos like this, check out more on my channel if you haven't already. If you're watching this live during March Caprice 2023, make sure to stick around for the next submission. And if you're watching this after the event, there should be a playlist with all this year's submissions, so make sure to check that out. March Caprice is such a wonderful event, full of wonderful people, and I don't know if I would have thought to do this video without events like these. Thank you, March Caprice team, and thank you all for watching.